Kyrgyzstan, one of the largest lakes and river outflows, tucked into the region with a long history of the Silk Road. They sure know when cycles are changing. Let's go back 4,000 years and see how many changes. Do you think they would know a grand solar minimum is inbound? That would be 10 of these cycles. Aquifers surrounding the nation. There's so much going on with water resources, trading dams to have access to the aquifers, and limiting water downstream for more agriculture. It's all about these aquifers. Because in that region, there are 411,000 square kilometers of water under the surface. Libya did it. Nubian aquifer, food for the people. Petroglyphs litter the area. What did they see in the skies? Dolmens and sacred spots deep into the sides of mountains, gates, places of worship. Electric geology heading from one valley to the next. Tashrabat's been rebuilt many times. Maybe it was a reminder from those who witnessed the event. Electrical discharge, electric geology from the lab to the crust of the planet. And with 30,000 plus petroglyphs down valley of this event, how would you represent plasma dancing in the skies on a rock surface? Concussion wave would accompany this event. Radial blast, bringing in supersonic ground winds with an updraft. Barana Tower, statues in the earth covered, almost like Easter Islands, the statues buried. They're called balbals. And looking at the stark similarities, left, Göbekli Tepe, center, Easter Island, and the right, Kyrgyzstan. Perhaps what we thought of as mere petroglyphs are etchings of plasma displays witnessed in real time in the sky. Gas giants are lining in a single quadrant in the solar system, not seen since 1486 or 79 AD. Electrically, our cloud cells are going to go out of their positions. So will the jet streams. And this will interfere with the ability to grow food in the plant and harvest dates we know. We should be talking about this, but perhaps that's the reason for so many distractions. President Biden's economic decisions are gripping our nation, and everyday Americans are watching as their purchasing power continues to fall further, and the uncertainty of what's ahead in 2022. And this administration has moved forward with $6.6 trillion of spending, and next on the agenda is the greatest tax hike in generations. Economists are comparing our current inflationary environment to 1970s inflation, and if you look back, gold was up 20x and silver 37x from 1970 to 1980. Learn how simple it is to add physical gold and silver to your portfolio ahead of the rise in inflation and predicted price rises. Patriot Gold Group has a no-fee-for-life IRA where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold and silver. Call 1-800-356-4470 and get a free investor guide today. And with the knowledge that Patriot Gold Group is Consumer Affairs' top-rated gold IRA dealer from 2016 to present, click on the link in the description box below for more information. And now on with the video. And what led me to this video and talking about cycles of time, Kyrgyzstan, new issuance of their postage stamp, Kyrgyz Express. Looks like a plasma glyph to me. And if you do look at Kyrgyzstan, the entire landscape seems to be of sculpting by wind, but supersonic wind, or electric forces. It's cool, littered with mountain ranges looking like arrows pointing into themselves. And closer to Suleiman, sacred mountain, Richtmeier Meshnov instability patterns. Must have been supersonic wind once again. But what would cause the change? A change in frequency, a change in voltage, a change in the cycle. Over time, the last 12,000 years, increasing Earth's temperatures, higher voltage, decreasing Earth's temperatures, lower voltage. We're heading into a grand solar minimum right now. Would explain a lot of the changes that we're seeing on the planet. Moving into access to control of food distribution and food purchases. Look for it, 2022. It's all about the sun stepping down in a 400-year cycle, and as it does, more energy from the sun reaches the Earth. Intense aurora, I must admit, now turning into plasma ropes, glowing the deepest reds, and now intertwining field-aligned currents. What happens when that turns into interplanetary lightning or crustal plate to crustal plate anomaly just on the Earth's surface? Impact bolide air shock. But it doesn't really matter whether it's plasma or meteor impact. People ran for cover. You'd think that would be the safest place on the top of this sacred mountain, Suleiman. But it was fried, melted from the plasma, sculpting that cave into perfection. But somebody did survive, and they left all of these petroglyphs for us to try to understand, decipher in a plasma laboratory right now, 2021. Could we replicate something by putting more voltage or current through a plasma field and coming out with some of the same shapes? Because as you look across the world, you see the same exact iconography on all the canyon walls. All cultures all have the same similar shapes 12,000 years ago. The smiley face right here is now a new issuance in Kyrgyzstan for the Post. So it's great that it's in the forefront here that a petroglyph, a plasma glyph, is on and in the mail circuit. This stems from a couple of petroglyph sites across Kyrgyzstan, which I'm going to talk about in part 2. Each area has their own set of petroglyphs that match up with different electrical discharge or bolide impact shock. Now these petroglyphs are from Suleiman, Sacred Mountain. The difference in what you're seeing from the Star in a Jar Sapphire project is input of current. Turn up the voltage, things spin faster. Our ancients saw all of this before we even had the machinery to create plasma laboratories to replicate the same images, atmospheric events, or displays in the skies that they had seen. 12,000 years ago, now it's taking us all the way to 2021 to get back to where we can get, it matches up what they already saw. So who's more advanced? Moving over to Squatter Man, seen across the planet, every culture, look it up yourself, Squatter Man, and you'll find the same exact representation of a standing human, 2 arms, 2 legs, sometimes dots next to them. Voltage, you're looking at the exact same thing with just different current inflow into it. Question, which one's spinning faster? Which one's more highly charged? Because when you look at charged state, you're looking at the pattern right in front of you. As it dips down lower, that is a lower state of activity. When it goes higher on the chart, it's higher electrical activity. Now these just happen to match up with colder times, lower activity. Warmer times, higher electrical activity coming from our star. So a glimpse into Suleiman 2 Sacred Mountain. I put the black arrow there. That is the direction of discharge. During this event that created a sacred mountain, people ran there for safety. That as the shock envelope swept across the land, it turned everything into dust, comprised of the minerals within the dust. And that layer blew across the mountain, leaving what you see there on the hillside. That shock reflection is 90 degrees from the path of the blast. Wherever it's moving, go right or left, and that's where you'll start to see a lot of dendritic ridges. On the other side, you saw that huge dust layer covering the same exact mountain. Traditional geology tells us the entire mountain should be covered that deep, because if it was leaves that fell there after millions of years making soil and stuff blue, whatever, the excuse, time frames, millions, whatever, it should be the exact same around that mountain. But it's not. That wind came from the other direction, blowing all that material. There is a cave there, a massive cave. It's covered by a museum. But what I find so signal-giving here, the importance of those petroglyphs right there at the cave entrance. It's a museum now. What's the first thing you see? The petroglyphs are trying to show something magnificent happened here. Learn from it. Know the changes. Know the cycles. Look for the indicators. So here's the cave that many people took refuge in during this time. So think about that. All that wind, all that dust, rocks, everything piling up on the other side of the mountain, but you're watching it blow past you above your head. You think that would be a sacred site after the event finished and you lived through that? Now, this is the size of the cave entrance now, but it was a bit smaller before they did a bunch of renovations, turned this into a museum, put up the glass walling there. But as you enter, look how far down this thing goes. This was a refuge center. Maybe it was just a lucky one that it was just in the right place at the right time and everybody could get there. And in this map from 1889, the blast pattern would have been following the line on the bottom straight, and that wind would have been, well, you can see exactly where it's going. The artist did a very good job of showing you how it's stacking up with the winds, just like sand dunes. Which direction is the wind going? All toward that center, which was the covered now with very fine dust of the same size in the sacred mountain of where the cave is. And off to the right, you can see there were some airburst features. Would be to the east. What's it look like? The feathers. So the inhabitants of our earth 12,000 years ago ran to these caverns. And that's the reason you're here today. And you might want to check out the Younger Dryas and how quickly the temperature dropped and how quickly it rose back up and why there were so few people left. So if people did witness this, and the petroglyphs are of electrical discharge in our atmosphere, plasma, lightning holding state for 2 minutes in the atmosphere, dancing across the skies. That's what you're seeing on the canyon walls. But would there be physical evidence with what was left in terms of the petroglyphs and now what we can replicate in the plasma laboratory? Andy Hall, thank you for putting all the prior research together. I'm just showing you a spot on the planet where it is. Thunderbolts project, everything's electric, bow shock melting and plowing the ground. So what does that mean for you and me? Well, it can happen in one of two ways. It can be a plasma bolt, literally interplanetary lightning, or continental plate to continental plate lightning, something that gigantic. Rip up the ground 500 miles from where it struck or more and turn it into dust. This type of so far off the scale of even comprehension in terms of multiplying what you know now, the biggest you can possibly multiply it in your mind, and then multiply that by 100 again. That kind of lightning. Or what we saw in Chelyabinsk coming over, whoosh, that bolide hit and it created the concussion, just like Tunguska. Either mechanism, same result. Although some are more identifiable than others, you're going to start to get patterns. As these dielectric properties mix and match, hydrodynamics, aerodynamics, supersonic winds, ionized base minerals out of the crust of the earth, leaving visible traces. Follow the wind. Follow the pattern. Follow the vibration. Follow the interference wave or electrical discharge. Brownian tree, electrical scarring, Kyrgyzstan. Visible right in front of you. That coloration is something else. How far in each direction do you think that vein that was cracked has refilled with some other mineral? Like quartz, for example. Hyperconductive. Airburst feature, what would happen with the cyclonic winds in full updraft above our atmosphere? A divoting of the Earth's surface with the electrical scarring running down the center, showing you which direction the winds went. It would be more of what we've seen in some of the 1950s low-grade nuclear tests in the desert. Single shock wave followed by multiple shock waves. And with the dielectric properties separating material by charge and element, you should start to see patterning of heavier to lighter materials along these same exact lines of strong secondary waves. And what do we have here? Top right, the butterfly pattern. That's the bolide above Earth shock wave impetus drawing up above Earth's atmosphere supersonic winds. But far from the blast pattern, far from there, you would also have that same amount of ionized particles coming from that discharge, layering themselves, blowing like grains of sand across the desert. Now scale it to this here in Kyrgyzstan. This is electric geology. You know how big some of the sand dunes you've seen at beaches, possibly if you've been in the desert, in the Sahara, that'll rival the largest sand dunes out there. So where did all this superfine particulate come from to make that sand pattern in the wind? Well, it's actually an ionized wind blowing apart the surface of the Earth to the point where everything's rearranging itself by density in the atomic scale and layering. That's what you're seeing. But then the dielectric properties of the minerals in our crust would start layering themselves, along with shockwave wind formation patterns of hillsides. Stratification. You're seeing it right in front of you. I bet there's a lot of really good mineral deposits in that country. And here we have those that witnessed the event some 10, 12,000 years ago, or earlier, some say 4,000. What we can replicate now in the plasma laboratory is what was seen and what was left in these canyon walls. I'll run through a few images here for you. I've linked everything in the description box below so you can chase down your own information. Thunderbolts, electric geology, electric universe, sapphire, S-A-F-I-R-E. And do you see the centipede in the center? And at the bottom left, the star. X flares have an X. I wonder how many. It would be X100, and it would have something shining as a 6-sided star. Squatter Man is just the base for all the electric formations to grow off of, following the same circuit down the center. Squatter Man, the most famous across the planet, seen in every culture, mentioned in every culture, references and iconography, images, paintings, drawings, carvings in every culture across the planet. It must be the first one to be seen. So when you surpass a certain type of charge, this will glow first. In the heavens, something like this. Would you keep going to work if you saw that? Would you save for your retirement if you saw that? Now, what if you knew this would be back in 2024, October? And I'll bring you some different plasma experiments here on the right. I see number 7 on the left looking very similar. And you can see 12 starting to take on some similar configuration, 11 as well. What you're looking at is charge state. What I would do is rearrange the petroglyphs by the charge that they first start glowing and taking shape, that people could carve them on the canyon wall. I'll say number 22 and number 20 are the strongest current flow versus number 5, which is the beginning. See, glyph number 5 is on the bottom right in the plasma laboratory. But then glyph number 17 is the top left. You can see the charge state's increased. So is the vibration, so is the change in the plasma itself. The frequency is changing, so the plasma is going to change in intensity and what it does, how it glows, what it looks like, what shape it takes. So again, I'll say right up there, number 22 will probably be one of the highest charges on the entire spectrum there. Starting with number 5 should be the top left, and 22 should be the bottom right, and then you can fill in the rest. And the plasma columns that you're seeing are actually connecting out through the ionosphere, way above the mesosphere, back to the sun. So when they're illuminating, below what you're going to see are electric elves encircling the Earth's magnetic field line. So whatever they witnessed at that mountain must have been much lower in the atmosphere. So I'm wondering how that phenomena could occur 300 miles further down into our atmosphere. But it's all about the wave. Expansion fan wave. We're going to talk about this in part 3. And how those same supersonic winds can bend in on themselves. And the elephant in the room, thermal stratification and layer deposition. Is it really that easy to pick out mineral deposits? Knowing where electric geology took place and everything reoriented itself, and all those same atoms and molecules pulled back in from the same elements in the crust and rearranged themselves in giant iron ore deposits, manganese deposits, silver deposits, gold deposits, whatever it is. And all snap back together, and they're charging you huge money to go in and mine this stuff. It's already right there. I guess it's about the supply chain and building roads in there to get it out. This trucking highway will get you to China. Incredible amount of change happening so quickly across the planet, just never ending. Something larger is at play. A cycle such as this, that's going to limit food production. Hungry people get a little angry. They want more change. And governments through history have had a problem with this. So get in front of the problem and start controlling access to food through some means as global crop production decreases because of these same electrical changes. I mean, these discharges I'm showing you here are far orders of magnitude compared to a grand solar minimum, but the same rules apply. The vibration's changing. So instead of it being a mountain range moved by ionic action, think about how the cloud layers, the cloud cells, the jet streams could be moved by electrical current moving out of our crust into the upper atmosphere, trying to equalize with the sun. A cloud's much more pliable than a rock. So it really would only take a small current change to change the cloud layers and move the atmosphere more. Then it would be noticeable with this kind of discharge that the ancients witnessed and then gave us warnings across all the canyon walls. And these next few years are going to be about the food, the ability to grow it, the lack or amount of fertilizers, and how expensive the prices are going to get. The next 5 years are going to be the food years. Whether you grow it in open fields or whether you grow it in greenhouses, whoever controls water resources is going to control food supply. A drop in here in Kyrgyzstan's largest lake catchment basin. This feeds several other countries with the outflows, but Kyrgyzstan said, we are going to turn off water flows outbound because we need that for our own agriculture and electricity production. So anticipate getting less water. And some of the neighbors they refer to are the same neighbors sharing the old Silk Road. Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, all neighbors with thousands of years of travelers in history, especially climatic records. So let's say in earnest the Silk Road was in its infancy 3,000 years ago, being scouted out 4,000 years prior. We'll have to go all the way back into the Neoglacial, and how many cycles of massive cooling and heating have there been? So 2 areas of contention for water from Kyrgyzstan, maybe a flashpoint in the region. This one seems to have been solved. That yellow line is the border between 2 nations splitting through a dam. Undecided, disputed territory. That's an interesting place to have disputed territory because once a river, now a dam. Plentiful water means plentiful agriculture in a dry area. So, of course, people would be very, very, very concerned if their water was to be taken away from them. But Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan have come to an agreement, a swap, if you will. Kyrgyzstan's going to hand over this dam to Uzbekistan in exchange for 80 square kilometers of land. Now, they were in such a hurry to resolve this, which means they really needed to get the resources in order of who owns what to move forward with the new food production plans in the country. Because when you look here at the transboundary aquifers across Central Asia, by far, Kazakhstan has the most in the country as well as spilling over into neighbor borders. But we're interested in a tiny little section of this in the far east and to the south of Kazakhstan. And as I was talking with Jeff Nyquist earlier today, Russian foreign affairs expert, he was telling me that Russia still controls a lot of what's going on. So, of course, they're going to move their food production further south, especially in Russia when they're having more difficulty. It's getting colder. They're going to sub out the food production into these nations. And we're going to really zoom right down into where you see the red and yellow jutting into what looks like the mountains. That's where that lake/dam is that's being exchanged for land. So when you look at this, and especially the capital Bishkek, Aquifer from Kazakhstan also sharing that. And it's 411,000 square kilometers within this region alone. That's an enormous amount of possibility to take an arid region in greenhouse, computer controlled, and grow an enormous amount of food. So the area down near Osh is what's being traded. Now, what I see is above ground water resources being traded for below ground water resources and access to the transboundary aquifer. You're sure not transferring all that water from Bishkek over those several mountain ranges. But look how flat it is. How much water's in the areas that could be easily built out with agricultural infrastructure undercover. And looking at the areas here by aquifer and the wells being plunged down in there, the AS-47, that's Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and a sliver now of Kyrgyzstan, the Preparedness aquifer. It's only 21,000 square kilometers of water under there. And the country can also take advantage of the shared aquifer with approximately 50,000 square kilometers of water underneath it, border area right there with Kazakhstan, right under Bishkek as well. Proof of concept is where we want to go. Libya, Gaddafi had done this. That's the Nubian sandstone aquifer system we're looking at. About 13,000 square kilometers of water just in Libya alone. And there were some 100,000 hectares, about 250,000 acres of food production until the U.S. went in and destroyed all the water pipelines and aqueducts. Which makes me think that North Africa and the Sahel is a hot piece of property right now. Grow zones go offline if you have to restructure agriculture elsewhere. Increasing rainfall from the West African monsoon, and then look at what you can tap. That's millions of square kilometers of water. And a lot of people sure have left there in the last few years. Almost empty now. But it is all about the water. And politically, is it really about this arm wrestling match to get an extra couple gallons out of the rivers? Or is this something much deeper for regional survival as we head into this grand solar minimum? Playing the cards close to the chest. Now back to the cryptocurrency mining farms that were shut down in greenhouses disguised. Very strange how these two are interlooping here. But the state said that it was disrupting the electrical grid with 2,500 mining rigs. So I don't know how robust the entire country's grid is if 2,500 mining rigs are going to take out your country's grid. That sounds more like an excuse to me than it does actual interference. But it did link back to these greenhouses. Then off Sputnik News, it talks about Kyrgyzstan just expanding greenhouses like every country's doing right now. But asking the simple question, where was the extra water going to come from except for the dam? And I think we have our answer. Trading land to be able to put wells down into that aquifer in exchange for some river flow. Now, another thing that Kyrgyzstan was doing was really trying to court miners to come over, which makes almost no sense to me, where they're closing down a 2,500 rig mining operation, quote unquote, illegal. But then they're inviting mining companies to come in to run mining rigs, but then they want to charge them 15% tax. So if they do invite institutional and stock market listed mining companies, and we're talking about cryptocurrency mining, not rare earth minerals, there could be 100,000 rigs in the country, but that's okay as long as the tax is forthcoming. But back to the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Economy. Apparently, they have been studying Silk Road records for the United Nations and also putting out working papers asking for feedback. What do they know about these cycles? And their sudden interest in all things water, all things greenhouse, all things cryptocurrency. So is it that they're going to trade river flow for aquifer access to still be able to do agriculture and greenhouses in these drier areas? Whatever it is, something's happening lightning fast in this transition into the grand solar minimum. I was looking around for different lakes and water bodies, found Chatir Coal right on the border with China. But when you're looking around the geology, the placement of a sacred site here, Tash Rabat, pin on the map, actually has a second sister feature. So I'm wondering if something's there that's sort of undiscovered. But Tash Rabat, fortress / dolmen / place of worship, carved into the side of a mountain. Enter at night, enter at day. Area here on the map for you. Central in the south of the country, mountainous. But the story goes this was to keep camels for traders along the Silk Road. I'm not buying that for one single second. Still a religious spot, still highly revered. 30-some plus rooms going deep into the mountain. Refuge spot or something built after an event in case it returns. So looking at the area around Tash Rabat, electric geology as far as the eye can see. Whether it's standing waves from electricity or wind, deconstructing and then reconstructing the landscape. Shout out to Thunderbolts Project, Andy Hall. Yes, there are people listening to your message. Electric geology, electric universe. This one I think falls into the electrical category of plasma discharge onto the planet's surface. You can walk out after a strike point where the charge, where the current is flowing. And if you bring it on to the topography of Kyrgyzstan, I'm really going to laugh if you tell me that's erosion right there from water or wind. It's too perfectly placed. And you see the standing waves right about the 3 o'clock position come in off the crop grow zone, and you can see the direction of the wind that was pulling along with the current flow. So if this truly was witnessed, there would have been people that would have left signs and said, whoa, this reshaped the society. If you start to see these signs around the skies, another one of these events could be inbound, please beware. And for the longest time, people couldn't understand what all these symbols meant. But now in the modern age with plasma laboratory experiments, we can start to match up shapes, current inflows, change quite easily. And a lot of people have just been baffled by the circles. Is it the coronal discharge, a massive nova, or something that they saw actually increase vibratory state and change in front of them, like they do in Sapphire Project, Star in a Jar. But interestingly, Kyrgyz Post puts a plasma petroglyph right in as a new issuance. Now, if there were this kind of event with planetary lightning or continental plate to continental plate, massive bolts screaming across thousands of miles of our sky, there would be a massive shock wave that would hit. And as it did, supersonic winds would start creating pillar updrafts like you see after the explosions in the desert, the nuclear tests. Everything's pulled upward 300-400 miles well above the atmosphere. And as that's replaced with the supersonic winds pick up even further, 800-900 miles per hour. And as these winds are rushing in, these shockwave patterns are taking formation as the materials are redeposited. It's always this triangular shape that you see with these buttresses and wind patterns perpendicular to the blast. So the telltale sign is what you're seeing here, these stacked pyramid shapes. Because if you were to witness something like this, you would carve it on the rocks. And now we can see the state change, what they were trying to represent on a solid medium. Some of these are quite easy to show, whether it be the antlers or the horns. They were depicting the same changes. And if you were to look south from this area, you would come to a place called Simalu Tash, where there's 30,000 petroglyphs in 2 valleys. They definitely witnessed this firsthand and had given us warning on the rocks. And then it puts a different context into what was built on the mountains as a place of worship and refuge. The story goes it's for camels here and pack animals in the Silk Road, but that is a place of sacredness. The stories say one thing, but the actual usage says something else. Now back to these shock waves funneling like a nozzle of a hose, depositing material with the vibratory pattern. Very distinct once you start to know what it looks like. And if you look at different shockwave behaviors, you're getting a lot of stacking in the same exact expansion forms. The same standing wave forms at the base of the mountain range leading up to Tash Rabat. Also, when you reach the apex of the range there, you see the same standing waves. But here's where it gets a little bit interesting. This looks like the discharge point of the plasma itself hitting the Earth, as a discoloration and heating had reconstituted the elements and then melted them into this glacious form. But you can see the discharge and the wind pattern both at the same time. And in that darker green, the electrical filaments are quite visible there. Just spinning it, looking in a different direction of the same topography, but just at the base of that strike. And the mineral elements look as if they've been separated and then came back into those veins. And if you look through the center of this image, you'll see the same updraft deposition and layer creation. And other areas to the east or west of that range leading up to Tash Rabat, also incredibly interesting geology. You just don't see this. Filamentary electrical currents going into the crust, in the winds layering and reforming what's now the river valleys. So think about it like this. The electrical discharge comes in from space or from another continental plate and discharges over this point in Kyrgyzstan, sending out electrical current, rearranging the crust along with the supersonic winds. But what would be at the very end of the terminus point of these electrical current filaments where they burn themselves out, literally, and the charge doesn't go any further? That's the terminus point. Something just like this, littering the landscape. Kyrgyzstan, there's millions of these. But then you have the shock wave with the wind, and this is just the very finest of material, like dust, if you will, sand is blowing through the air, and where it terminates, you might see something similar to this. But that's at the very furthest reaches of the end of the shock wave where it would deposit loose gravel. So what you've seen here is occurrences and accounts of what had happened during the Younger Dryas, 12,000 years prior. This is a massive event. What if we come into a lighter version of something, electromagnetically changing our atmosphere, the crust itself creating more volcanoes and earthquakes? This grand solar minimum is here now. And at the same time in 2024, we have a planetary alignment of the gas giants, all four of them in a single quadrant of the solar system. And the best match is 79 AD, and the second best match is 1486. That's it in the last 2,000 years, and we're here again. You could expect that the cloud cells will be disrupted on the planet and go into different flows. So will the jet streams. But it's really about our ability to gauge food planting and harvesting dates. Because we've hit a year globally where agriculture has been tested, to say the least. And next year there will be fertilizer shortages, diminishing yields, in addition to what the Earth's weather is going to throw at us again. 2024, will those four gas giants have their own second magnetic field enough to intercouple with Earth in its regular combination of the sun's electromagnetic field? Perhaps this is why there's so many distractions happening now. This is the real reason for change. It's all about the food. 2022 is the year of understanding for most on the planet, but it's all about the Silk Road. This area has been well traversed for thousands of years. The cycles of climate have come and gone. The onset signals are known. But more in the ancient past, beyond the Silk Road, the mythological stories of creation, mountain building, supersonic winds, the dragon's teeth formed from the dragon's breath. A lot of electric geology explained in what would have been lexicon of the time. So something moved the entire society to put these shapes and features on the walls, carve them into the rocks as a warning to the future. Now the last spot I wanted to cover here, Balasagun, otherwise known as Borana Tower. Out in the plains, also, the ancient legends say those mountains were built by wind behind. Was this a refuge? It's been rebuilt several times. It's leaning now. So there's a leaning tower of Pisa and a leaning tower of Burana. And the interior of it is nothing like we're used to seeing, where it's a hollow cylinder inside. This thing was built to withstand 400-mile-an-hour winds and electrical discharge. You know, they were saying when the caravans were coming through, sometime with lightning storms would run through the valley, and the people in the area would run into this as a shelter, like a tornado shelter. So there's myth and legend mixed into modern day understanding of how dangerous winds and lightning can be. But celestially, I don't have any reference point of where that is in the skies and at what time it was built, what constellation it would be looking directly over. But the electric geology is really prolific around these areas. Standing waves with supersonic shock, updraft pulling in a single direction as materials were redistributed along that shockwave pattern. That matches exactly up with what the dragon and the wind form in these mountains, the legends had said. So the area right here on the map, Kyrgyzstan, little red dots right up at the border with Kazakhstan. And to the east, the largest lake, which is also making the headlines because Kyrgyzstan is going to limit water flow out of there for more agriculture and electricity production. So the downstream neighbors, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, are going to receive less water. Hence, they're digging into and tapping wells along the aquifer systems to still be able to have greenhouse agriculture in these drier areas. Now back to the fascinating part here. The tower is amazingly built. The construction itself is awe-inspiring. But when we come to these statues, very similar to what is seen in Easter Island. Some are buried up to the neck, some are fully exposed. Many are far older than others, and you can see different layers of time within the statues. And the weathering and the erosion as well. They're called balbals. You're looking at one of the oldest ones right in front of you. And there is a significant difference in the older statues, the carving style, the stone used, the depth at which they're buried, mud flood, perhaps, global liquefaction event, compared to some of the newer, what is also placed out there, but I'll notice to the back left. How old do you think that one is compared to the one on the near right? How much weathering has taken place over the eons to erode that down? And what's so significant here is these are protected, and they have been and always will be. And if we do want to do a little comparison here, Göbekli Tepe, that's on the left side. Notice the hands. Easter Island, center, the hands. To the right, Burana. Notice the hands. Do you think this was a civilization that was connected across the planet some 10,000 years ago? And the myth and the legend and the stories of plasma discharge and crustal sculpting, mountain range building through supersonic winds, all of these cultures have the same exact references and time dates to these events. So the thing where the myth and the legend match are the human reports and the petroglyphs left over showing us the events in the skies. Now what modern history says happened, or what the Silk Road journals talked about in climatic shifts over the centuries, go back 6,000, 7,000 years prior to that. And this is probably where the cultural heritage of this region in the world began as well. Let me know what you think about the comparison from Göbekli Tepe to Easter Island over here to Burana. I'll be putting this together as a full 1 hour and 15-minute mini-series with all the 6 parts in the different petroglyphs areas and how fascinating this part of the world is. The reason I'm bringing it up, the water wars are starting there. The ancient history and the cyclicity is referenced there, and they say the cycles are returning, and there's a new cycle inbound. That's why there's so much action in access to water at the moment, and there's so many things pointing to this area of the world knows the cycle's back, and they're taking action. So what can we learn from the past to help us get through the future? Well, one thing is going to be having food and access to food. Emergency food supply, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. Adapt 2030 in My Patriot Supply. 25 years shelf life. Give yourself the peace of mind knowing you have storable foods. And even if you don't buy from My Patriot Supply, please go get some food. You're going to need it through these trying times. It's going to get really expensive, unavailable, and there's going to be limits to what you can buy in 2022 as the rationing begins. So I wish you the best in your preparations, and I hope that this more ancient view of what has changed can help you also reference and put something in a frame of where we're going right now. I do thank you for watching. Hope you got something out of the video, and I'll see you next time.